Hello and welcome to PC Benchmarks. Today we're taking a look at the new DDR5 RAM. It is finally here, released alongside the new Z690 chipset and Intel's 12th gen, with much improved frequencies ranging from around 4800 to 6400 MHz, but with the detriment to the latencies that are ranging from 30 to 60, whereas DDR4 has been mostly sub 20. Here we tested 4800 MHz versus 5200 MHz, and we'll benchmark them to see if there is any difference in just 400 MHz. We also use these with an RTX 3090, an i9-12900K on an ROG Maximus Z690 motherboard. We start off with control, and at 1440p Ultra, the 4800 MHz averages 128 FPS, with a 1% of 106 and 0.1% of 99. With the 5200 MHz averaging 129 FPS, with a 1% of 105 and 0.1% of 96. Up at 4K, the 4800 is averaging 68 FPS, with a 1% of 57 and 0.1% of 28. Then the 5200 is averaging 68 FPS, with a 1% of 57 and 0.1% of 25. Moving on to CSGO, at 1440p, and the 4800 is averaging 355 FPS, with a 1% of 122 and 0.1% of 39. And the 5200 is averaging 346 FPS, with a 1% of 84 and 0.1% of 43. Then at 4K, 4800 is averaging 320 FPS, with a 1% of 148 and 0.1% of 51. With the 5200 averaging 336 FPS, with a 1% of 149 and 0.1% of 63. Cyberpunk is next, and at 1440p, 4800 is averaging 99 FPS, with a 1% of 84 and 0.1% of 80. Then the 5200 is averaging 104 FPS, with a 1% of 85 and 0.1% of 73. Then at 4K, 4800 is averaging 69 FPS, with a 1% of 58 and 0.1% of 14, with the 5200 also averaging 69 FPS, with a 1% of 61 and 0.1% of 57. Then we have Days Gone, and at 1440p, the 4800 is averaging 142 FPS, with a 1% of 87 and 0.1% of 59, with the 5200 averaging 154 FPS, with a 1% of 97 and 0.1% of 43. Then at 4K, the 4800 is averaging 84 FPS, with a 1% of 64 and 0.1% of 43, with the 5200 averaging 91 FPS, with a 1% of 68 and 0.1% of 49. Moving on to Gas Station Simulator, and at 1440p, the 4800 is averaging 125 FPS, with a 1% of 82 and 0.1% of 35, with the 5200 averaging 138 FPS, with a 1% of 92 and 0.1% of 32. Then at 4K, the 4800 is averaging 76 FPS, with a 1% of 56 and 0.1% of 29, with the 5200 averaging 76 FPS, with a 1% of 57 and 0.1% of 27. We have New World next, and at 1440p, the 4800 is averaging 125 FPS, with a 1% of 72 and 0.1% of 57, with the 5200 averaging 129 FPS, with a 1% of 82 and 0.1% of 18. Then at 4K, the 4800 is averaging 126 FPS, with a 1% of 80 and 0.1% of 67, with the 5200 averaging 126 FPS, with a 1% of 78 and 0.1% of 14. Then we have Rust, which at 1440p, the 4800 is running 126 FPS, with a 1% of 88 and 0.1% of 58, with the 5200 averaging 121 FPS, with a 1% of 74 and 0.1% of 7. Then at 4K, the 4800 is averaging 105 FPS, with a 1% of 22 and 0.1% of 7, with the 5200 averaging 101 FPS, with a 1% of 68 and 0.1% of 9. We tested these in Blender as well, with the BMW render, and the 4800 achieved a time of 1 minute 33, and the 5200 achieved the same time of 1 minute 33, no difference here. We also ran them through Cinebench R23, and on single core, the 4800 MHz scores 1949, and the 5200 MHz scores 1954. Then on multi-core, the 4800 scores 25,777, and the 5200 scores 26,190. So as you can see, there isn't really much difference between the two options. There is only a few FPS in between them, with the score going up in Cinebench, but not as much as you'd expect. Maybe more latency options will be a better option down the line, or when we get even higher frequencies out there will be a bigger difference. But thank you for watching, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.